My name is Julia Snyder. I do the programming for Beth Meyer Synagogue. And this program is in honor of Yom Haatsamaut, Israeli Independence Day, and Yom Hazikaron, Israeli Remembrance Day. So our two guest speakers are Or and Reuven, who both work as Israeli fellows for the Hillels in North Carolina. And I met them with doing other programming at the synagogue, and they were really awesome. And I thought they'd be great people to talk about their experiences in the army and with Israel. So I'm really glad that they're here today to share their experiences. So I'll let you both introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about your background and where you're from. So, Or, do you want to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone, and thank you, Julia, for setting this up. And good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Because this is like a very general question, and also we need to have enough time for Reuven to answer and for us to ask more questions. I'll try and be as brief as I can. So my name is Or. I'm an Israeli. I have been living in Israel most of my life until just recently, and I'm planning on going back very soon. I was born in Jerusalem, and we moved a lot. So I lived in a moshav, in a kibbutz, small towns, and then in Jerusalem back again for high school, and most of my 20s in Tel Aviv. I served in the IDF between 2007 to 2010. I was a combat medic and a commander in an infantry battalion called Shimshon, Samson. And I served during cast-led operations in the West Bank and Gaza Strip in 2008. Yeah.
Awesome. Reuven, you want to go?
I was about to ask Or if he has any further history beyond that point that he wants to tell us about.
That's it. That's where it ends. No, I know that this is like Yom Hazikaron, Yom Haatsamaut IDF story, so try to keep it brief. I have at least 10 years after that. Thank you, Reuven. I'm happy to answer any questions about that as well.
Okay, so I'll try and match that brevity as Or's. So hi, my name is Reuven Remez. I'm also from Jerusalem, and thank you very much for making the time to join us and hear our stories this evening. Unlike Or, I grew up most of my life in Jerusalem, been living there up until very recently before I came to North Carolina. My army service I did in the Israeli Air Force at their anti-aircraft corps, where I served as a team leader and also a commander between 2008 and 2011. Not too many things, I guess, to highlight in that, aside from the fact that I was eventually awarded Outstanding Serviceman by President Shimon Peres exactly 10 years ago, almost to the date. And that is about it.
Yeah, I'll say for both of us are a Jewish Agency Israel Fellows. We're part of a delegation of emissaries that are basically working at Hillels on college campuses. Reuven is a second-year Israel Fellow at Duke University in Durham, North Carolina, and I am a third-year Israel Fellow, first year at the Triad of North Carolina Hillels, which is Wake Forest University, Elon University, and High Point University. I've been working for Boston University Hillel for 2 years prior to that. I think that was important to mention while we're here.
Cool. So now I want to go back a little bit to before your army service. Like when you were little growing up in Israel, what was kind of the feeling or education you got about the IDF growing up? Like what kind of messages did you get about the IDF from your friends and family?
Yeah, I'm actually quite fascinated about this question because, to be quite honest, I'm dying to know what Reuven has to say about that and how similar and how different that is. I grew up to a mixed family. My father was born in Poland to a Holocaust survivor family, and my mother was born in Jerusalem to an Iraqi family that came to Israel in the 50s. We in our house, our immediate and extended family, the culture, the general values were completely different. Than each other, and sometimes kind of like came into beautiful fusion. But I think in terms of an Israel narrative, and when we talk specifically about military service, we knew that this is something that not only is mandatory and by law, but it is also important to serve and protect the Israel in general. I will say another word that I remember that as a very young kid, every birthday, someone will say to my mother or to myself, usually adults, may he will never need to serve. That would be kind of a part of like a happy birthday, and more specifically talking to my parents in like we're so happy for your son's birthday, and may he will never need to serve. But it's type of mentality of understanding that this is an important mission, an important role that you need to play as an Israeli. Mind you that Reuven and I also were born and grew, like we were born in the late 80s, and we were growing up in the 90s in Israel, while there was so many geopolitical changes. We're talking about the Oslo Accords. We're talking about a wave of terrorism and an intifada by the end of the decade. And so I think that at some point it was very clear to my parents that, beyond those beautiful wishes, I will need to serve at some point. And I think to me, it was very clear that I'm going to be serving in combat, because to me, that was the most important thing. Most of my life, I grew up in a moshav, in a small town that is literally, it's about 30 minutes from Jerusalem, but it's literally 10 minutes away from the West Bank. And to me, it was as if not only as I'm serving my country, as I'm directly protecting my family. And for about 6 months out of my 3-year service, I actually was stationed in a base that directly was placed about 10-15 minutes away from my family's house. And so I felt a direct connection to what I'm doing in a sense of mission.
I think that to a great extent, there are a lot of similarities between Or's story and mine, especially what he said about people wishing him and his family that by the time he's 18, he wouldn't have to serve in the army. This is something that my mother repeatedly used to say herself to me, but apparently to no avail. I think to me, in my family background, the story is a bit more different and like a bit more polarized, I would even say. My father, my grandfather were both in the IDF at certain points. My grandfather was in the Air Force. My father was a paratrooper, and my dad seemed to be very, predispositions to support the army service. He was very much, thinking that it was something that every Israeli does, and it's something that is very key to society, that he remembers how during his youth, people who wouldn't get in the army would really feel that as some sort of like a mark of shame, that you are not part of society unless you do your service. On the other hand, I had my 2 older brothers who I think either through their military service or shortly after that became very, very disillusioned with the entire narrative of military and society. And they were, sorry, I just received an email. And they were very much bringing up repeatedly how they're very how they object to the entire military mechanism in Israel, and how they don't want to do any reserve duty, and how much that causes them personal agony to be involved in the conflict in that way. So that sort of create a bit of an ambivalent notion, I think, in my mind, exactly how to approach it. And I don't know about Or, but I think that personally, I know that I did not have, that what's needed is like a killer instinct in the combat unit, even though at the time the anti-aircraft corps was still regarded as a combat unit, but it was, I think Or would agree, it was like the least amount of combat you could expect to see at any given point. And since I was deemed fit to serve as a combat soldier, I opted to go there as much as I could. Also because I was not at the height of my physical shape, so I would probably have died just from running up and down those hills that Or probably used to run up. On the other hand, I do remember that in our high school and middle school, there was a very, very strong discourse regarding military service. High schools would repeatedly bring alumni who are currently in the Army to talk with us about what they call a meaningful service. How do you make the most out of your service, and what units they are in, and and how do they approach the entire nature of being in the Army. And that is something that was, including my brothers, would call that indoctrinating. Other people would call it preparing. So it very much depends on what end of the scale you're looking at it from. But it was a useful peek into what we could expect a certain profile of military service to look like.
Interesting. Thanks that was very enlightening. So I want to talk more about while you were in the Army. How would you describe yourself when you started? What were your expectations? How do you feel like you grew throughout your years of service, and what was like your biggest achievements and developments in the process?
Yeah. Wow, Reuven, I loved your answer because it kind of like added so much to, I guess that besides a few similar differences, I experienced the same thing, same with the general narrative at high school, the preparation versus indoctrination. I thought it was very interesting and very insightful. Years in the Army. So I guess that just just pick it up from the high school days, just like I guess American students, high school students are starting thinking how to build their best CV/portfolios and do a lot of volunteer work so they can look really good at the cover letter that they will send later for a university or a very luxurious campus. I guess from the age of 16, we're starting thinking about our military service. And so and Reuven can probably attest to that as well. As a high schooler, as a 16-year-old, what is it? A sophomore? I don't know. As a 16-year-old, you get a letter from the Army as a like official. It's really cool. I was studying in a boarding school in Jerusalem, and it was like, when are you gonna get yours? How old are you? Okay. Oh, so I'm older than you, like 2 months. Okay, so I got mine already. So there's a lot of anticipation of when the Army is officially going to recognize you. Some people will be like, oh, they forgot about me, and then they get something in the mail, and you basically receive a date of recruitment, and that is very exciting. But throughout this process, throughout those few years, you get invited by different units based on your major in high school. So in high schools in Israel, we do majors, and based on a few criterias that you need to go through and tests, and based on that, those units will decide if they want to invite you for interviews, for further tests, for further assessments. And like I said at the very beginning, to me, my father was in the Air Force too, and he fought in a few wars during the 70s and early 80s. in Israel. And to me, I was never as passionate about the Air Force, not necessarily despite or because of my father, but I wanted to make the most out of my military service, and I wanted to feel like I am on the ground, hands-on, doing stuff. And that is why I rejected every single invitation from intelligence unit. Intelligence unit is it's the biggest unit, army unit in Israel. So when we say army, we mean like the whole military. But I rejected any invitation. I think that I didn't even show up for like some of the other units, and I was so determined to prove to myself and for the military that I'm an asset as an infantry soldier, a person who get the things done on the ground. And so I got drafted to the infantry battalion called Shimshon, called Samson. It's part of a big brigade called Kfir, which means cub lion. And it's just like, if you heard about different units, it's just like Givati or Golani, anything like that, doing exactly the same thing, mainly working in the West Bank areas C's, B's, and sometimes operating in Area A. I don't want to complicate this too much. And in the Gaza Strip, if there is a major operation. We talked about, you asked about accomplishments, right, Julia? I think that in general, the army is itself as a whole full service I feel as an accomplishment. I think that every single person that go through that service feels a sense of accomplishment, regardless of their service, because I think that there's a lot of honor and respect and dignity that you receive, but also you feel that you've done your part, you've done your service. So in general, I would say that this is generally how I felt. I can start in getting to some stories, but I also want to give Reuven some time to answer. So I'll just say that to me, I started as my basic training in the infantry battalion, and then I got an invitation to go to a combat medic course, and I did that for 3 months, and it was completely intense. But and I received kind of like an honor as the, I don't know even how to call it. It's so funny when we talk about army stuff, like all of a sudden, like I can't speak English because all the terms are in Hebrew. I was one of the leading combat medics in the course, and I received a certain medal during that course. I think that one of the accomplishments that I would say, first of all, is passing that course, because it was really hard, but also it taught me so much more than just medicine and how to treat. It taught me how to view people and not choose sides when I'm treating, which later on translated to me, even under fire, giving treatment to both sides during a difficult situation. I can talk more about that later. Reuven, you take it away.
First, I think it was really fascinating to hear about your experience, because I don't think we've gotten to talk about it almost ever. So Julia, you were asking like, how was the initial experience in the army? How, like, what was the approach? I think first of all, it's important to emphasize that, because Or and I are both like 10 years plus out of our service, so things in a different perspective, and when we look back at them, you look at them through a different set of eyes. And also our generation is different than the generation that is currently serving. I think that norms are also shifting regarding the service itself, and it's something that I think I've noticed a lot during my service. And I think that if I had to pinpoint something, it was that a lot of people are prepped up to go into the army, that there's this Hebrew word about every person that goes, very highly motivational person going into the army, that directly translates to English as like poisoned, but it's more like poised to do something like really, super influential in the army, just like make the most out of it. And on one end, it's great because it gives you people who are highly motivated. Usually they outperform most of the people that might be in their same unit or in the same boot camp class. But I think it also, for some people, a lot of them don't understand how the system works before they go in. They only see like the flashy things about the service, like you get to carry a rifle because for an 18-year-old that's so cool. You get to wear a uniform because you're gonna look so good in them. But once you actually get to the army and you have to do like mess hall duty, latrine duty, like, and I'm not joking, you literally sometimes have to paint rocks. It becomes sort of like people are like, I just can't wait to get out of here. I just like want to count the days till I'm gone. And some people have that phase hit earlier than others. Some people have that just, maybe months before they get discharged. They're just like, I don't give a damn about anything anymore. I am done in a month, so leave me alone. And I think in my boot camp, a lot of people were already just like, I am not entirely sure why I'm here, and I'm just gonna do the real minimum just to get through. But for me, I think that I did end up going very highly motivated into the service, and I figured, that if I am in a new place, in a new set of skills, with a new set of people that I get to work with, there's some merit in like, giving it your most and like performing to the best of your abilities. And in Israel, in the Israeli army, there's a word for like a person who basically sticks to all the rules and regulations and just, does what he's told and doesn't ask any questions, which also directly translates to English as yellow. I don't know why. I guess maybe like in some context with the American derogatory term for yellow, not as an Asian people, I don't mean that at all, but as a coward. And I think that there is some very crooked way at looking at people who are in the army to make something real and something that they find, meritorious and valuable. And it was a bit of a distance to just try and balance, really wanting to do something the right and proper way, and on the other hand being criticized by some of my peers, like, why are you always having to be the way you are? Why do you always care too much about the system when the system doesn't care too much about you at times? Which is difficult, because if you get ostracized by your peers, you basically have nowhere to go. And that's a very difficult situation in a system that is based upon camaraderie, and a unit as being your second family, when you get to see your family maybe once in 2 or 3 weeks for just 48 hours at times. And it was a very rough thing to get over, because really understanding how to prioritize how you approach doing things on base or doing things when you are in operational duty, and not meet any sort of opposition or criticism or just a hard time from any part of these two equations is a challenge. But I figured that if I have a good edge over others, just being just that motivated, I might as well just use it. And I wound up just getting professional in like my system and in my base and in my unit that we operated with. And it got me involved with other people in my unit that usually don't mix along, because in the anti-aircraft corps, you have the combat role, which are the people who operate the entire system, but you also have like the mechanics who are responsible for maintaining and basically setting up all the equipment that us combat people have to use then. And I wound up like really getting to know them and really getting to understand the systems better than other combat personnel there. And eventually, I think that this also helped lead me to getting about, I think, 4 or 5 different outstanding serviceman awards, including the one that I was then given by then President Shimon Peres. And it even at that time, it was a bit, looked at with a bit of a crooked eye, oh, you just did that so you could get that award. You didn't do that because you really cared too much about what you do. You just wanted that recognition. And in a sense, sometimes it feels like a lose-lose situation, but also at times it does feel like something that you can get a lot out of, because different units, let's say, had or gone to the intelligence unit, it is now known to be basically the greenhouse for the entire high-tech industry in Israel. And I feel that people sometimes really underestimate what you can get from that army. And I feel like a lot of the times now, even 10 years after I've completed my service, in lots of situations where I do encounter hardships, I do sort of like look back at it and try to compare how things were in similar like situations. And that comparison sort of makes it easier to deal with those situations.
Awesome. Thank you both. So now I want to go through like a day in the life with IDF Soldier Or and IDF Soldier Reuven. So I have some photos that you've both sent it to me. So I'm going to share my screen. And
yes, already.
I'll start with Or. But you can just tell me like about the photo or like a memory that it reminds you of, or.
Yeah. All right. This is me. I am about 18 years old. This is basic training in one of the hottest days in like during the summer. I'm talking about at least 115, 120 degrees. Yeah, you can see that we don't have much in a basic training. So this is the very beginning. As you can see, I grew some beard before that. We are not allowed to have beards during this time. Our weapons are not equipped. It's just regular M16. And the reason I'm talking about equipment so much is because when you're in basic training, you're obsessed with getting to the higher ranks after basic and advanced training, and after you've been to the front line and you've done some active duty, as you get, it's the equipment that you have with you is kind of a testimony for your professionalism. So basic soldiers in basic training are starting in a point that they don't have anything but their weapon and basically a set of uniforms. And we build onto that. So think about kind of like a video game when you need to, as you level up, you become better. So we were very obsessed about that. And I remember thinking about that. That's kind of like the first thing that comes to mind. Yeah, we can move to the second one. So this is me way after. You can see my hair and my beard a little bit longer. So I was already a commander back then. So I did, so like I said, I did a combat medic course, and I go through a year of combat infantry course, which you do 4 months of basic training, 4 months of advanced training. You walk a lot, and you train in Krav Maga, which is the Israeli martial art, and shooting drills and so many things that we can't talk about everything. And then the next 2 to 3, 4 months is you get a little bit test of the waters, and by the end of the year you become a combat soldier. Immediately after that, I was I was spotted by the commanders as potential for commandantship, and they sent me to a 3 months commanders course. So this is from that area. It's usually it's basically me taking a look at one of the activities on an Arab village in the south of Hebron, which is in the south of the West Bank. Yeah. This is actually me the day of the receiving the commander's I get certificate. So as you can see, my uniforms are different than here, and the reason that they're different is because we have more like a ceremonial uniforms that we proudly wear with all the pins, the colors, and this is what we wear when we go home. Like Reuven said, like for a day and a half every couple of weeks, this is what we would wear. And so for ceremonials, services and stuff like that, this is what I would wear. So on the shoulder, it's the rank. I was a sergeant back then. And from left to right, you have the brigade pin, the commander's infantry commander's pin. On the right, the long pin is the combat medic pin, and the far right is my units. And this is what you can see from here. So this is just me not understanding why my mom is so proud and taking a picture of me. Yeah, this is actually a picture from me while I'm in reserves duty. I don't know if many people know. I guess that by now everyone knows that to serve in the military is mandatory. But for many of us, the service doesn't really end when you are done with your 3 years. As a combat soldier, I am serving in the reserves of the IDF until I'm 42. So this was taken actually a few years ago by a friend of mine. We train and we do basically the same thing that we do as active military soldiers, but for a shorter amount of time, sometimes every year, sometimes every couple of years, based on the situation. Reuven is laughing because you can see the change in how a reserves duty soldier is looking as opposed to a regular duty.
Also laughing because I noticed that you're also left-handed, and I wonder if they gave you a left-handed rifle when you came for reserve duty, or you lucked out and you got like a right-handed, which is not the ideal.
Yeah, so I am left-handed. That is a good spot, Reuven. So you can see that I'm holding the rifle with with the left hand, and the end of the weapon is on my left shoulder. And yeah, and the reason that Reuven is saying that is because on the right side of the rifle, after you shoot, what is left with the bullet is spitting out. And yes, for my basic and advanced training, on purpose, I don't know what they were trying to prove, but my commanders did not allow me. Yes, Reuven, they did not allow me to have a designated left-handed rifle, and so I would get hit every time I shoot. But this one is a left-handed one.
I think it might be worth mentioning that there's some people think that that American campuses do it like the worst, but there used to be a very, very bad culture of hazing in the Israeli army as well. And I think what Or has just demonstrated, that he even as a greenhorn basically just had been hazed pretty extensively by his commanders, because the risk here is if you're firing a right-handed weapon on your left shoulder, you'll have all the casings basically flying back at your face.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned hazing. I think that in general, the narrative in the army for the past 30 years is that your commanders will say you need to toughen up because we had it worse. So this is how they justify hazing. To be honest, it's really not happening like that anymore. And there's many other forms of hazing which are which are not a part of the army, but it's definitely a point that during basic training, as a young soldier, you must endure.
All right, Ruben, it's your turn to
Go for it.
see your photos.
Uh,
Bye.
I don't know. I just look at that picture, and it's a bit difficult to see that sort of a haircut, especially. I do feel a bit lucky that my hair isn't receding as back as it looks like in that picture. So something to be happy about. So this photo was taken about 10 years back when I was in Jerusalem in preparation for the President's Outstanding Serviceman ceremony, which, to be honest, was a bit of a pain in the back because they had us sitting like statues for about 2.5 hours while the President, the Chief of Staff, and the Prime Minister are just, basically having drinks, and we're serving as props in the background. And only then for about 20 minutes, they just make the time to give us our certificates and the pins that we then received. But I will admit that the week and a half that we did get to spend in Jerusalem was a very welcome break from regular service, where they just took us to all the major events and ceremonies in Israel, because you know that Yom HaShoah was a few days ago, and Yom Hazikaron is beginning tomorrow evening, if I'm not mistaken. And so basically, they took us to all these events and pretty much, prime seating location to everything. So there were also certain perks of this. Also going to the Kotel for the Yom HaZikaron service with the president and the chairman of the Knesset, spokesperson of the Knesset. And it was actually pretty interesting time, just basically being with different people from the army who are going to receive the same award as I am, and hearing other people's stories. And I'm kind of looking back, and I was definitely in a much better shape back then. You can see also kind of barely, you can see on my right hand side pocket, like there's the anti-aircraft commander's pin right next to my battalion pin, and on my left hand pocket, that's the anti-aircraft combat soldier pin. And you can actually kind of make out what our unit tag looks like. It's a BAT. And the reason that they chose BAT for the anti-aircraft system is because BAT see at night. And we had to see all the aircrafts during the night as well. Yeah, I think we can move on. So Or was talking about how hot it gets in Israel. And this was in one of the deployment drills that we did with the anti-aircraft officers training course, where basically they force you to wear sometimes this additional vest, like not even a vest, it's almost like an entire overall that is supposed to protect you from radioactive, biological, and chemical weapons. And then what you see on my left hand thigh is a mask. It's a gas mask that sometimes during the middle of the training they said, okay, you've been attacked by an aircraft that just dropped a canister of gas on you, so you just all have to put on your gas mask and continue operating your machines now in 120 degrees heat with the mask on your face, with an additional overall on your body, and good luck not getting a sunstroke, which was a pretty fun time at a given time. And given the fact that most of us had only maybe 2 or 3 sets of uniform, you end up finishing those 2 weeks of deployment and training, basically going through all your sets of uniform. And if you're lucky, you might have had some water to wash one of them because they all wind up smelling pretty bad. What else did bring up something additional to mind, which I am blanking out on. I think it might come back, so we can move on. Oh yeah, I did remember. So the entire reason is that my unit was stationed around Dimona and Arad. And does anybody know what's in Dimona or by Dimona?
We're not supposed to tell everyone.
Oh, it's what is known as the textile factory. So it was one of the ideas, the ultimate rationale of my unit was to be one of the two frontline air defenses around that area of the Dimona nuclear station. Whatever, it's not a reactor, it's just like it's a developmental, whatever it is, nuclear something. So we were stationed there and had actually spectacular sunrises and terrible sundowns because there was some windy area. Pretty hot, and it was just right overlooking the Dead Sea and the Jordanian west border. So the reason that we were training in these deployment exercises with all that additional gear was because we were trying to simulate what would happen in the hopefully unlikely case that somebody did manage to somehow compromise the nuclear research center in Dimona. So this is another picture from those deployment exercises, and I served in a Hawk missile system, which is an American system that is now about, 60, 70 years old, and a lot of it had to be done manually and calibrated manually. So this, in the middle of the desert, again, basically deploying a small measurement tool that we use to help align our systems to the north. There would be a person standing about 400 or 500 yards down the line with one of the systems looking back at me. I would look at him, tell him exactly what's his heading, and that way he knows where the north is. The only issue is that during those deployment exercises, we had exactly 2 hours to deploy an entire Hawk system battery, which usually included 6 different launch pads, most of them loaded up with missiles, but we can't mobilize them pre-loaded. So we had to mobilize all the rockets on a different pedestal. Once we reach our deployment site, we had to get those missiles off that pedestal with a specialized vehicle, transfer them to the launch pad, while everybody else is basically placing all the other machinery, and we had to do that all in the span of about 2 hours, which was actually a very fun time, I have to admit, getting in that rush of just time and excitement just really I have to say, it really did get me pumped, really get me going. That entire action sequence, kind of I kind of have to admit that for some reason I do have Kenny Loggins' Danger Zone playing in my head when I'm thinking about it for some reason. Maybe because I was in the Air Force, but it was actually part of the funner experiences, even though a bit exhausting parts of the service.
Cool. Well, thank you both for sharing that. I'll stop sharing my screen. So I just have one more kind of conclusion question, and then I'll open the floor to anyone else who has questions. So kind of conclusion, looking back, how do you feel your experience has changed your outlook on life, your identity, your Jewish practice, your political views, and then also kind of connecting that to how do you feel about the holidays of Yom Haatsamaut and Yom Hazikaron for you, and also, for your friends and family in Israel who celebrate the holiday.
Yeah. I'll try to keep my answers as short as I can. So Reuven has some time to answer, and then we can have enough time to open the floor for some questions. I'll say two things. Like, one of the things that I'm proud of, and I think I reached to a realization how proud I am only after my military service, is our spirit of Tzal. I'm carrying it with me all the time. This is my basically IDF pack, and inside there is my military service. There's my reserve duty card, and there is the traveler's prayer from my unit. And the best thing here is Ruach Tzal, which is the spirit of Tzal. It's basically a code book or a guideline for a soldier. And this is something that we are not only being taught as in basic training, this is something that me, myself, as a commander, also I am teaching it actively for soldiers. I'm sorry, I'm working with students for 3 years. Please forgive me. And we always come back to that, to those guidelines. And this is something that I'm very proud of. There are guidelines and kind of like core values of how we as soldiers view, and I'm just reading from here, like honesty and sincerity. How do we value the purity of life? How do we as a soldier and as a commander and as a citizen, how do we work in order to be the best of ourselves and also set an example for others? How do we use our weapons for defending, and how do we use our weapons in a way that won't compromise human life, but will be a means to defending, and on, professionalism, etc. And this is not a trick. I am carrying this in my bag everywhere I go. And this is something that I feel that it's oftentimes been forgotten, that the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, and the military in general has a code, and we have rules, and we have guidelines, and we have values, which if you look at it in an Israel, meta look, most Israelis are ending up in the army. It's a melting pot culturally and socially, and of course politically. And so when it comes to core values that you learn as an 18-year-old with a gun in your hands, I took it very seriously and became a part of who I am even after the army. And I think that for me, that is the thing that I'm most proud of. And in retrospective, that made me who I am today. I'll say a quick word about like Yom Hazikaron, Yom Haatsamaut, Yom HaShoah. There is a very clear reasoning why Israel decided to have Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, and then Yom HaZikaron, Memorial Day, and then Yom Haatsamaut, Independence Day, right after the other, just after Passover. So if you think about that Israeli narrative that is trying to be distilled into this melting pot around the 50s of Israel, you'll see that there is a clear line of trying to build an Israeli identity as well as a Jewish identity. So if 3 weeks ago we're celebrating the Exodus and the Promised Land and receiving, the code, the moral code, in the middle of the desert, basically, and then founding Israel, kind of like a reborn, or kind of like a new Israel. A few weeks after, we remember the fallen in World War II, in the Holocaust, and what predates Israel as we know it today. And then a week after, we commemorate and celebrate Yom HaZikaron and Yom Haatsamaut together. And I think that is very important. Memorial Day in the US the commemoration and celebration, I guess, is very different than how we approach it. Unfortunately, I could say lost a few friends, a few brothers in arms in different capacities during the years, during my military service and during my reserve duty service. And it's a time that me personally, I'm not doing barbecue anyway, but it's a time of reflection and mourning and remembering and commemorating. And I know that the idea, part of the narrative, I think it's part of the Israeli in me, that if they weren't there, no one would. And that change in Jewish consciousness, I guess, to start being the victim, start being reactive and being proactive, I think as a commander, it taught me a lot and really shifted my the way that I look at things that have happened in the past and how I want things to be in the future. I promised I'll try to keep it short. I try. Reuven, you take it.
I think one thing that maybe the Army does give you is a very real experience of an essence of being an Israeli. I went to I've technically still a member of Reform Reconstructionist congregation in Jerusalem. And I have been since mitzvah. And during my time in the military, I do remember that whenever I would stay over weekends, I would try as much as I could to go and complete a minyan for the guys who were doing Kabbalat Shabbat. But for me, it was a very different Kabbalat Shabbat because they usually did like the Mizrahi version, whereas I came from a mostly Ashkenazi version. So like all the different tunes and different versions and different texts that they use instead of like the Ashkenazi ones I felt like I learned a lot of some larger sense of being Jewish and larger sense of being an Israeli in that aspect. And much more strongly, it was, I guess, more challenging during Yom Kippur, where they actually put like a mechitza in what they converted to a makeshift synagogue. And I was like, well, where do I sit? If on one hand, I want to help them make a minyan, but on the other hand, I am not 100% with that entire mechitza thing. I wound up sitting like exactly in between, in the middle. And that also brought some questions from people that they were like wondering, what is this like reform thing? What do you mean by that? Why do people do this and why do that? And isn't it like more like Christianity? So there was a lot of like mutual exposure to different traditions, ideas, backgrounds, which I'm very grateful for having. I think it tells you a lot about a society and the people in it just by being able to learn other people's stories and motives and also curiosities. That's something that I feel we're not exposed to that intensively a lot these days. Well, especially with COVID, but generally even without that. And I think again, like I said, looking back 10 years and more, it's I don't think it's easy to avoid judging oneself and how things looked like when you were 18 to 21. Like when you think about yourself, well, I felt so cool with holding a rifle, but now you're thinking like, well, does it make sense, giving an 18-year-old a rifle and tell him, okay, you go defend your countries against who would tell you are the bad guys? And it sort of like makes you wonder about the entire ethos and like the entire way that we approach how we define the conflict and how we look at the utilitarian use of an army in Israel. Because as much as it is a defensive mechanism for Israel, it also serves as a very strong social bonding experience, a social formative and national formative experience. And I think in that end, there's some form of a responsibility of how you frame a lot of the situations that both the individual and the society goes through it. And it's nothing that has a very definitive answer. It's not a thing that you can say is either this or that. There will always be people that would complain about the army being very sort of like an indoctrinating machine, a very rigid, unforgiving machine that basically treats people as pigs. Sure, some people would say that the army also gives others the chance to become part of the Israeli society. The army gives them an opportunity to undergo conversion and become Jewish. It enables them to become more Israeli than they thought they could be. And I think that there is lots of merit still in it, while there are some, things that we criticize because that's the nature of Israelis, to criticize everything.
Awesome. So thank you guys both for, opening up about your experience. Now, if anyone has any questions about anything having to do with Israel or in Reuven's stories, you can just unmute yourself or you can type it in the chat.
I have a question. If service is well, it's not volunteer, it's mandatory for 3 years, but are there people like here in the United States, people go into the military and they kind of stay in the military, or they go in the military and they get training for a future job that they then move into or stay? I mean, how is the Israeli army, if you guys are all, have to go in from 18 for 3 years, who stays in, if anybody does? And I mean, you kind of implied that if you're in the intelligence service, you've got to entree into the technology, but I just was wondering, it seems all volunteer and then you're a reserve, but where's the standing army, if that's even part of it?
Yeah. So first of all, like we said, it's mandatory to serve in the military. It is not mandatory to serve as a combat soldier. Only combat soldiers are volunteering to be combat soldiers. That's one thing. The second thing about your question, you can go through either the avenue of an officer's course, and you could continue doing your job, and it becomes work and becomes a job, and many people stay, and it becomes a military career. There's also another avenue of a non-officer. It can be anything from logistics to so many things. Think about the army as the biggest organization you can think of. That when we say army, and also based on the pictures, this is what you picture. You picture one soldier with a gun. But at the end of the day, the majority of the military is a whole system that feeds, that takes care of everyone, that educates and tries to be self-sustaining. So think about like I said, from food to uniforms to to gun knowledge, everything. We need people for more than a few years, and so there are a lot of options to stay in the army, and that is not volunteering anymore. That is not mandatory anymore. That is just a military career.
That's like here, and that is like here.
Yes, absolutely.
Another avenue is that there are people who can get deferred service and have the Israeli Defense Forces pay for their academic education. But by doing that, they have to assume another year of service or more than 1 year. So it depends on what degree they're getting, because if the army pays for your degree, they expect a substantive return for the money. So you have these career academics that wind up doing 5, 6, sometimes 7 years. Also, if you go and be in the, let's say, if you go to the Air Force and you become a pilot, you have to remain in the Army for an additional, I think, 5 years as a career serviceman. So it's a very ongoing process right now. They're trying to also restructure it always, but it does leave a lot of room for people either to advance it like career-wise if they want to.
I'll tell you.
Yeah.
Barry, do you want to go? And then maybe we'll wrap up since it's getting late.
Yeah.
Can
I'm
I
wondering
ask a
about the,
question?
pardon?
So Barry can go, and then I'll take some more questions.
I was wondering about the Arab Israelis, the citizens of Israel, and do they serve in the army? And maybe it's a much more complicated question, and my apologies for it. And if you want to just say it's too complicated, I understand. How does this affect your feeling toward the Arab neighbors by being in IDF for 3 years? Both, I know before you come in with formed ideas, but how does it affect afterward? What's the effect afterward?
Yeah, I can say that, first of all, there are about 21% of Israelis who are not Jewish, and they're not, it's not mandatory for them to serve in the IDF. They, however, can choose to. For example, the Druze community, which is a different religion than Judaism, Islam, etc., they serve, all of them, almost all of them, except the Golan Heights Druze, they are serving in the military. They have their own unit, but they also serve in anything that they want to volunteer to. There are Israeli Arab Palestinians who choose to join the army forces, and I have served with at least one in my unit. That is a whole different conversation on how it affects them back in the village, when they're sometimes the only ones who are serving, and they believe that they're first Israeli, then Palestinian, and not the other way around. But it's definitely open for them to do that. According to the law, they don't have to do it because of different interests. So that's just in general how things are working in Israel. And by the way, Barry, thank you for asking that. I don't think it's I think everything about Israel can be complicated, but we always we'll give the
Higher, you can hear it better.
Yeah. So the last question, part of the question that you asked, is how does that affect? So, and this is my own personal criticism about the narrative. So I exposed the narrative, the Israeli narrative that I'm at least coming from, and a lot of pride in not only in my service but also in the way that we approach like ourselves as soldiers and military men. But there's also, in my opinion, a design when it comes to trying to make it easier on us. And so, for example, the reason that the intelligence unit reached out to me since I was 16 is because I majored in Arabic. And the way that they teach Arabic in high school in Israel, in the non-religious education, is literature Arabic, which is kind of like Old English, like Shakespearean. So imagine me coming to America and trying to speak Shakespearean with you. You'll look at me very, very weird. And so we learn Arabic, but we don't know how to speak. Many of us don't know how to speak. And the people who actually go to the military and in getting involved with some of the intelligence unit, they do learn that, but that's a different context. I know for sure that if each and every one of us as Israelis, especially Jewish Israelis, would know would know Arabic as well as Israeli Arabs know Hebrew, because they speak perfectly, we will be in a different place. It will feel closer, right? Also, in terms of like community, there is no direct segregation laws, and there are a lot of places where Israeli Arabs and Israeli Jews are living together, but to the most part, countrywide, there are specific places where and you can spot what is a Jewish kibbutz or a moshav or a village, and what is an Arab village. And if anyone here been to Israel, you can spot it from miles away, the architecture, the culture, etc. And on a personal note, the more we try on a cultural, social level to be together from the very beginning, knowing the language, understanding the culture, having friends who are Israeli Arabs and vice versa, that yes, it will make the military service a little bit more complicated, but it will make us as a society a little bit stronger and a little bit more open to dialogue.
Okay, do Shirley and Bob want to share their questions?
Just have a couple of questions, actually. One is, how did you and your family usually celebrate Yom Haatsamaut? And secondly, tell us a little, we'd love to hear a little bit about
What you're doing here.
what you're doing here, how you got into this program, what are you trying to accomplish, how long is it, and what are your future plans?
So I think generally for my family, Yom Haatsamaut has been a great opportunity to meet with friends and family. In Israel, it's a tradition to have barbecues during Yom Haatsamaut. Like you could see exactly all the the major camping sites where people just pull out with their grills and basically grill an entire refrigerator's worth of meat and or vegetables in Or's case. And I think we didn't do anything too out of the ordinary about it. I would either meet with relatives, with my aunts and cousins, or other distant relatives, or just with friends doing that. It's basically an off day that, unlike Jewish holidays, you have everything still working. So you have public transit, you have everything going on. So it actually kind of feels, I don't know if Or will agree with me or not, but on a certain extent, Yom Haatsamaut feels weird because it's a holiday, but it's the regular holiday where it's like, if it feels like Shabbat, because it isn't. There is no halachic observance there. That's one. Or do you want to fill in that before we go back to the second question?
Yeah. So for you asked about Yom Haatsamaut, but I'll answer for both. Like Yom Hazikaron, this is something that a lot of Israelis wear. It says Izkor, remember, and we use kind of the same word for the Holocaust Remembrance Day, but the symbol is different. This is a flower that I don't know the name in English, but the way that we say it in Hebrew is the Maccabean blood, right? And it's how we commemorate part of a major service that has been doing for Yom Haatsamaut, and the evening for Yom Haatsamaut, there's a transition that very much resembles Havdalah in a way. That transition between a day of remembrance to Yom HaZikaron, and it's going on a national level, and there's a whole ceremonial led by the government service. And in specific locations that evening, there's a lot of very much like 4th of July, a lot of barbecuing and fairs and lightnings and stuff like that. Me personally, I've stopped barbecuing because I on a personal level, I just don't think it's the way that I want to celebrate independence. I don't see the connection, the educational value of a barbecue. But just me. In Israel in general, yes, just like Reuven said, everyone barbecues and tries to have a good time during that time. Reuven, tell us a little bit about how did you get here?
I'll just throw it in. I have a very unsolidified and ungrounded theory that the reason that people barbecue is because it is not a halachic holiday. You can light fire, so you use that time. If you have an off day with the family and everybody, you might as well just make the most out of it. So why am I here? I was looking to do something outside of Israel, maybe connecting with some community development, and I was recommended to approach like the Israel Fellows track by friends who've done that previously in different universities across the States. I also felt like I want to experience some other parts of the world aside from Israel. And generally, being relatively familiar with the American Jewish world due to being in my synagogue, it felt like it would be an interesting mix to try and bridge between the Israeli world and the American Jewish world. And so far, it's been very, very interesting to see how people approach both their Jewish identity on campus here at Duke. I know that people have had lots of personal experiences there that have shaped them quite substantially in their years here. On Saturday, we had our annual neighborhood event, which is an event that we do for people and students who have not had a chance to have a bar or bat mitzvah at the respective age. So they do it maybe at 21 or 2 instead, and that they're being accompanied by our rabbi. And since our rabbi is still, quarantined at home, I had to serve as her body during the service. So, when she gave the blessing to the students after they read the Torah, I guess I'll put my hand on your shoulder because I know that's what they do. And I'm actually just enjoying it because I think to me it's also been eye-opening to really understand what are the difficulties and some of the real challenges that American Jewish communities are experiencing, both in terms of their identity and what contemporary Judaism looks like to them, and also what it means to be connected to Israel, especially with the shift in perspectives and approaches that is sort of like a trademark of the times right now. And what I'll do once I'm done and I have another year here, so hopefully maybe next year I'll be able to see you in person for this event in a year from now. After that, it's a good question. I've encountered so many students who told me, I have no idea what I'm going to do once I graduate. I'm like, you're 22, I am 31, and I can give you the exact same answer. And I feel like a lot of it is pretty much open, and I think it's also something about our generation and as millennials that we kind of feel like everything is very fluid and it could shape and shift in a lot of different directions and different interests. So I think I might speak here a bit also on Or's behalf, but I think we kind of like keep our minds relatively open in regards to what we'll do. It could be in this line of work, it could be something completely different. And I think we're just enjoying the experience and people while we're at it.
Julia, do we still have time? I feel like we went way over.
I mean, we're over an hour, but if people still have questions and they're still, enjoying the conversation, I'm okay with staying on. If you have a hard,
I would love to stay as long as people. We want to be respectful of everyone's time, so that it's completely okay if you have other things. But I can answer the question.
I'm going to have to leave. I wish I could stay, but thank you very much. I so admire what you've done, but also your transition here and what it takes to be in another country. And even though there's familiarity, there's also differences. And I hope things keep going well, and I hope we get to see you again and hear how things are going.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Hope we get to see you in person soon.
Tell them you're what to do.
Yeah, I can answer the question quickly, and then maybe answer Lynn's question in the chat. So how did my path was actually quite different. I studied in Tel Aviv University sociology and anthropology, but I really wanted to be take part in the whole startup nation, high-tech companies in Tel Aviv. So I made a transition after I graduated from the university, and I worked for IBM, and I worked for another startup company in Tel Aviv, in Israel. And I was living in Tel Aviv. It was a great time, great perks, great salary, a lot of friends, really living the dream, living the Israeli millennial dream, to be honest. But I always felt that that wasn't enough for me. I wanted to do something actually meaningful. I wanted to do something that is more than just making more money for another company. I wanted to create effective change, and to be honest, I did not know how to do that, and I didn't even know how to approach that. And I remember it was my brother who we talked about that frustration that I had, that everything is great, but I don't feel meaningful. I don't feel impactful. And he said to me, let's take a look at your CV, at your resume. Why do you highlight your volunteer work so much? And all of a sudden I see that I'm highlighting so many things that I've done with Jewish community in Israel and outside of Israel. I've led youth group camps in the UK. I have been very active on campus about Israel, and I always wanted to learn more and do more about that. And to be honest, I stumbled upon a Facebook message. Probably, you know, Mark Zuckerberg is listening to all of my conversations, so he was like, "Yeah, that is, maybe we should, you know, promote that program." And to be honest, I never looked back. I applied for the delegation, the Israel Fellowship Program, and it has been by far the least paying job that I ever had, but the most rewarded one. And this is kind of like the tip of the iceberg of the transition that I made. And because we are on a working visa, I mean, Reuven here is an American citizen, so he will speak for himself, but I'm on a working visa. And so after 3 years, which ends in a few months, I'll be going back to Israel. The way that I see my shlichut, my vocation and my mission in general is also to bring back, you know, if I brought Israel here, I want to bring back American Judaism and share my experience as well, because there's a lot that we as Israelis don't know. And connecting it with Lynn's questions, Lynn was asking about Hebrew, about English, about differences and similarities. So I've got family from England. They taught me English since I was 3, so I always spoke English. But when I came to the US for the first time was 3 years ago. Before that, I never traveled here. And the transition, I moved to the US for work. And I thought that I knew English. I do speak the language, but I did not know how to speak American English. And that took time to understand. I figure out when someone is saying the word interesting, they don't necessarily mean that it's interesting to them. And many other things. I also changed a lot of the slang that I used to use in the UK. And I really found through the language, cultural differences and similarities in how people think, how people look at things. And that not only taught me about American culture and American Judaism culture, but it also taught me about Israel. And I think when I'm coming back with not only knowledge about stuff, I'm also coming back with a lot of added value that I've gained here. And I'm very grateful for that experience. I wish there will be a Jewish American fellow in Israel campuses. That would be absolutely amazing. As an Israeli who went to an Israeli university, we need that. Definitely.
Well, you know, some years ago, there was the North Carolina-Israel partnership. It was really devoted more to the arts. and there was an actual physical exchange of people. Israeli artists, et cetera, came here to North Carolina, and North Carolina artists, et cetera, went to Israel. And it was a fascinating program for those of us who had the opportunity to take advantage of it, to see the Israeli culture here, and then for the American culture to be viewed and talked about and discussed and seen in Israel. You know, and to your point is, the more you can
Interact.
understand the other person's or the other viewpoints culture, that's a magnificent statement. I just totally commend you on that. I really do.
Thank you.
Since it's almost 9 o'clock, if Or and Ruben are comfortable, you can put your emails in the chat. And if people want to, keep having conversation or dialogue, they can email you. And I'm sure we'll, try to do more programs with you guys while you're still here, hopefully in person. But then we can say goodnight.
Any chance we might be able to answer maybe one more question from the chat?
Sure. If you have the energy, we can do one more question.
I just saw Natalie's question regarding encouraging American-born and raised dual citizens to serve. I think it's a very much matter of personal feeling of belonging and association. Where does one feel like they relate more? The fact that a Jewish community in America has an event in honor of Israeli, both Memorial Day and Independence Day, is something that some Israelis would see as a curiosity, because what national affinity is there? Like, what? There is no real national connection, right? We are all Jewish, true, but in Israel we don't have any Memorial Day for, let's say, Jewish Americans who served in the United States Armed Forces and might have been killed in battle. And I actually checked, and there are more Jewish Americans who died in battle than Israeli have, and nobody talks about it in Israel. I think it's the real question would be, what do you feel like you are more part of? And I know that being a dual citizen is one I can talk about. It's a hard thing to bridge, because to a certain extent I do feel like a lot of cultural connection with the United States due to my grandmother coming from here. Whether it's national or it's very societal connection, I think there's something still missing. There's still some form of a gap. Like Or mentioned, there's this big force of colloquialism that are still, some distance between where I come from and where I am currently. And it really just is a matter of personal conviction of how much you are part of that ethos, how much you are part of that story, and how much you want it to be yours. Because that is, I think, maybe the toughest question to answer as a dual citizen, as a Jewish American person who does feel some connection and some, I feel like attraction would be a wrong word to use here, but some, yearning towards Israel maybe would be the correct term here. And I don't know if there's a right, wrong answer here. I think it's always just a matter of what feels right to the person and how much they're willing to go with that, and what they're willing to put first in their lives and in their, I guess, scale of values.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys both for sharing. And I'll say goodnight to everyone. Make sure to save the emails in the chat if you would like to.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much.